Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. You know I love to deep dive, and today we're taking a look at something I think a lot of you are really interested in,
Oh, yeah.
which is, does God have a plan for your financial well-being?
Right.
Does God want you to prosper?
Hmm.
And to explore this idea, we're going to be looking at prosperity through the lens of the Bible, and specifically, we'll be using insights from Myron Golden and his YouTube video, God's Plan for Prosperity.
Sounds good.
So to help me unpack all this, I have our amazing expert here with me today, and
Hello.
they know a thing or two about biblical interpretation and theology.
A little bit, yeah.
So let's get started.
Let's do it.
So one of the things that struck me right away in Golden's video was his emphasis on proper biblical interpretation.
Right.
He really cautions against just isolating verses and stresses. We have to look at the context.
Yeah, context is everything.
So important.
It is. He actually even calls them laws of interpretation.
Oh, wow.
He has these 3 laws that he focuses on: context, definitions, and first mention.
Oh.
And these aren't just kind of like, arbitrary rules. These are foundational principles in what's called biblical hermeneutics, which is essentially the science of interpretation.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does that mean, like, for someone like me who hasn't spent years in seminary? What does that actually mean for me?
Well, I think a good analogy is, imagine reading a letter from a friend.
Okay.
You wouldn't just pick out a single sentence
Right.
and base your whole understanding of their message on just that one sentence.
We look at everything around it.
Yeah, you'd consider the whole letter, the tone, the circumstances, all that stuff helps you grasp their true meaning.
Right. So we're not just taking things out of context.
Exactly.
And we're looking at the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're saying that when we apply those same principles to the Bible, it can help us avoid a lot of misinterpretations.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to topics that can be kind of sensitive, like wealth and prosperity. Yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of get tripped up by that, right? They're trying to force the Bible to say what they want it to say instead of just letting it speak for itself in its context.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so good about Myron Golden and what he's trying to do in this video.
Yeah.
Because so many people, I think, do fall into that trap of proof texting, right? Where they're just picking out a verse here and a verse there.
Yeah. And speaking of potentially controversial interpretations, Golden addresses that whole prosperity gospel thing head on.
Yes.
He's very clear that he doesn't think that, giving money to preachers is going to automatically guarantee you God's blessings.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really critical distinction to make because, yeah, the prosperity gospel, I think, has been widely criticized.
You feel icky.
It can definitely feel icky.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this connotation of almost like this spiritual quid pro quo.
Yeah, for sure.
Give
money, get blessings.
Yeah, give money, get blessings. And I think Golden's pushing back against that.
Yeah. And I think that's really refreshing for people to hear because I think people are so turned off by that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're coming to the Bible with that lens, it's hard to see anything else.
Right. So if it's not about manipulating God, into giving you financial gain, then what is Golden suggesting the Bible teaches about prosperity?
Well, he argues that the Bible does teach principles of prosperity,
Okay.
but it's more about aligning your life with God's wisdom. And then also, I think, understanding that material wealth can actually be a tool for good.
That's interesting. And, throughout the video, he uses this very powerful symbol of gold.
Right.
So what is the significance of gold? Like, why do you think he chose to focus on that?
Well, gold has always held immense value, I mean, historically, culturally.
Oh, yeah.
And Golden points out that it represents eternity.
Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't decay, right?
Right.
It doesn't corrupt or corrode.
Right.
And I think that's why it makes it such a powerful metaphor for something that lasts.
It's almost like he's saying true wealth, the kind that really matters,
Yeah.
has an eternal dimension to it.
Exactly.
It's not just about what's in your bank account.
Right.
It's about something bigger than that.
And that goes all the way back. I mean, even in Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see gold throughout history. I mean, you think about, ancient Egypt, the pharaohs.
Absolutely. In so many religious contexts, gold symbolizes both earthly riches and divine blessing.
Wow. Yeah.
It represents abundance, purity, the presence of the divine.
Right. It really elevates the concept of wealth, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about money. It's about something bigger.
Absolutely.
So I'm really starting to see how maybe our typical views of wealth are too limited.
Right.
We're looking at it through this very narrow lens.
Exactly.
So what happens when we bring this concept of gold and its symbolism into the biblical narrative?
Well, Golden takes us all the way back to the book of Genesis, the very beginning.
Okay.
And he points out that there are 8 specific mentions of gold in Genesis. Yeah, and all of them are connected to God's people.
Oh, wow. That seems intentional.
Right.
Like, why 8?
Exactly, and I think that's what he's trying to draw out here.
Oh,
And
interesting.
he breaks those mentions down into categories.
Okay.
Providence, possession, proof of God's blessing, and provision.
Okay, so walk me through those. What does he mean by providence, for example?
Okay, so he points out that gold is present in the Garden of Eden,
Oh, wow.
even before Adam and Eve.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's already there, built into the fabric of creation, which I think points to God's providence, his foresight, and providing for his creation.
So even in a paradise where everything is freely given,
Exactly.
there's still gold.
There's gold, which highlights the value that God places on abundance.
Okay, so even from the very beginning, God isn't against abundance.
Right.
In fact, he created it.
He created it.
Okay, and then it continues throughout Genesis, right?
It does, and we see that theme continuing.
Like with Abraham,
Exactly.
where he was blessed with a lot of wealth.
Yes, he's described as very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold.
It's not just spiritual wealth, it's tangible material abundance.
Yes, and I think that's important to note that the first time the word rich is used in the Bible, it's referring to Abraham,
Really?
who's a righteous man favored by God.
So we're seeing a pattern here.
Yes.
It's not like, God is, saying, oh, you can't be wealthy and follow me.
Right.
It seems like he's okay with his people being wealthy.
Absolutely. And I think that challenges this idea that we often have, I think, in the church, that wealth is inherently evil.
Right, that you can't be wealthy and be spiritual.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is a big one.
So Golden's arguing that wealth can actually be a tool for good, a resource to be used responsibly to bless others
Yeah.
and further God's purposes.
That's right. And he even gives the example of businesses.
Okay.
They create value. They employ people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They contribute to the common good.
So we're looking at it from a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at the potential for wealth to corrupt, we can look at how it can be used for good.
Exactly. And it raises the question of stewardship, right?
Right. If we believe that wealth is a gift from God, then how are we called to manage it?
Right. And are we using our resources to make a positive impact on the world?
It's not just about how much you have. It's about what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful. And that leads us to this really fascinating idea that Golden brings up this transfer of wealth.
Yes.
And he cites Ecclesiastes, which says that God allows even evil people to accumulate wealth so it can ultimately be transferred to those who are good in his sight.
Oh, now that's where things get really interesting.
It does.
Yeah.
It's very thought-provoking.
It is. And I think that's what's so good about Myron Golden is he's making us think.
Yeah, for sure.
And Ecclesiastes is a book that really grapples with the complexities of life,
Yeah.
the seeming randomness of wealth and success, right?
Because we see people who do all the wrong things
Ex-
and they end up being so rich. And then we see people who do all the right things and they just
This struggle
can't seem to get ahead.
Yeah,
It can feel very unfair sometimes.
it can.
So how do we make sense of that?
That's a great question.
Is he saying that God is somehow manipulating the system to benefit the righteous?
Well, that is one way to interpret it.
Okay.
But I think it's also important to consider other perspectives.
Okay.
Some scholars argue that this passage in Ecclesiastes really emphasizes the fleeting nature of earthly wealth,
Okay, regardless of who possesses it.
regardless of who possesses it, right? So it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter in the end because it's all gonna,
It's all going to fade away.
yeah.
Okay.
And others see it as a reminder that ultimately God is sovereign and he can work through even the actions of the wicked to fulfill his purposes.
Okay, so before we continue on this journey, I do want to remind all of you listening to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others who might find it helpful. We'd love to reach as many people as possible with these insights.
Yes, spread the good word.
And for even more great content, join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
That's right.
You can also follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.
Lots of good stuff.
Lots of good stuff. And we'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive into God's plan for prosperity with Myron Golden.
Yes.
And we are back, and I am still processing this whole concept of a transfer of wealth.
It's a big one.
It really is. It's really challenging the way I typically think about, success and where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, instead of attributing wealth just to individual effort or luck,
Right.
it invites us to consider God's involvement in the bigger picture.
So let's dig a little deeper into that.
Yeah.
Golden uses the example of Pharaoh putting his gold chain and ring on Joseph.
Right?
So how does that connect to this idea of a transfer of wealth?
That's such a pivotal moment in Joseph's story.
Yeah.
It really signifies a dramatic shift in power and resources, right?
Right.
Pharaoh recognizes Joseph's God-given wisdom.
Yeah. And his ability to interpret dreams. And because of that, he elevates him to this position of authority and basically entrusts him with the wealth of Egypt.
It's almost like a foreshadowing of what God intends for his people.
Right.
That even when they're in a place of lack or captivity, he can orchestrate events to bring them into a place of abundance.
Precisely. And I think it speaks to the sovereignty of God.
Right.
And his ability to work through even the actions of those who don't acknowledge him.
It's really powerful.
It is. And then he goes on and he brings up Solomon, who's renowned for his wisdom and his immense wealth.
Oh, yeah. King Solomon.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And, despite his initial devotion to God, we know that Solomon strayed from the path.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Due to the influence of his foreign wives.
Right, and it's like a classic cautionary tale.
It is.
It reminds us that even the wisest among us can be led astray by worldly temptations.
Yeah.
But, it's also a testament to God's grace.
Right.
That, Solomon eventually repents. Absolutely.
And returns to a right relationship with God.
Yes, and Golden actually emphasizes the contrast between Solomon's early life, where he wrote Proverbs filled with wisdom, and his later years, where he penned Ecclesiastes, which is a book really reflecting on the vanity of pursuing worldly pleasures.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It really shows how, our understanding of wealth and prosperity can evolve as we journey through life.
Yeah.
We encounter blessings, we encounter challenges.
Golden argues that the central theme of Ecclesiastes revolves around the futility of seeking fulfillment solely in earthly pursuits.
Right.
And he quotes Solomon's conclusion, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man."
It's a really powerful reminder that, true satisfaction comes from aligning our lives with God's will.
Yes.
It's not about chasing after these fleeting material gains.
It's not about this stuff.
Right.
It's for something much deeper.
So then how does that connect back to the idea of wealth and prosperity?
Well, he actually connects those ideas by quoting Ecclesiastes 2.26. "For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God."
Okay. Break that down for me. What's he saying there?
Well, he's proposing that God even uses the efforts of the wicked to ultimately benefit those who are righteous. Right?
So even the people who are doing things wrong, he's still working through them.
That's right. It suggests that there's some divine orchestration at play here, where even the accumulation of wealth by those who are not aligned with God's purposes can actually serve a greater purpose.
That's a bold interpretation.
It is.
It's definitely making me think, but it also makes me wonder about the implications of that.
Right.
If that's true, does it mean we're just passive recipients of God's blessings? Or do we have an active role to play in creating wealth and using it responsibly?
That's a great question, and I think it really gets at the heart of the debate around free will and God's sovereignty.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, like what is our part and what is God's part?
Right, exactly.
And I think Golden seems to lean toward the idea that God is ultimately in control, but that doesn't negate our responsibility to make wise choices and steward our resources well.
This is pushing me to think differently about my whole approach to finances and prosperity.
I think that's what's so good about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to just kind of stay in our comfort zones and not really think critically about these things.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Golden's interpretation?
Yeah.
Does it align with your understanding of the Bible?
I mean, it's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah.
And I appreciate his emphasis on seeking God's wisdom in all areas of life, including our finances.
Right.
However, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is just one interpretation of a very complex passage.
Okay.
There are other scholars who offer different perspectives on this verse in Ecclesiastes.
So it sounds like, we need to be careful about taking any one interpretation as the absolute truth.
Yeah, I think so.
It's more about engaging with the text.
Absolutely.
And wrestling with the ideas.
And coming to your own understanding.
Yeah.
Through prayer, through study.
And not just taking someone else's word for it.
Exactly.
Right? And that's where good biblical hermeneutics comes in.
Right.
Looking at the historical context, the literary genre, the author's intent.
All of that helps us interpret the Bible responsibly.
Right. And not just making it say what we want it to say.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in someone else's charismatic teaching.
Yeah, especially when it comes to a topic like this.
Oh, yeah.
It can be very emotionally charged.
It can.
But ultimately, our relationship with God and our understanding of His Word is a personal journey.
Absolutely.
Right? We need to do the work ourselves.
We do. We can't just outsource it.
And remember, the Bible isn't just a rule book or a prosperity manual.
It's a story.
It's a story of God's love for humanity.
That's right.
And it's filled with wisdom and guidance for every area of our lives.
And I think that's something that's so easy to forget.
This conversation has been so enlightening.
Yeah, it has been really good.
I feel like my understanding of prosperity has expanded in so many ways.
It's definitely a multifaceted topic.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what are some other key takeaways that you think our listeners should walk away with today?
Well, I think the biggest one is that there's more to prosperity than just material wealth.
Okay.
It's about living in alignment with God's purpose for our lives. It's about seeking His wisdom in managing our resources and using what we have to bless others and make a positive impact on the world.
It's about moving away from a scarcity mindset
Right.
to one of abundance, trusting that God will provide for our needs as we seek to honor Him.
And trusting that God's ways are often higher than our own.
Yeah.
We may not always understand the circumstances or the timing, but we can rest in the assurance that He is working all things together for good for those who love Him.
Beautifully said. And I think, while it's important to seek God's wisdom,
Yeah.
it's also important to remember that, we have a role to play
Yes.
in stewarding the resources He's given us.
We're not just passive recipients.
We're not just sitting back and waiting for the blessings to fall into our lap.
Right. We're called to be active participants.
We are co-creating with God.
That's right.
That's powerful.
And that's where discernment comes in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be able to distinguish between worldly pursuits that ultimately lead to emptiness
Right.
and those that align with God's purpose for our lives.
It's about seeking wisdom, listening to the Holy Spirit, making choices that reflect our values and priorities.
Yeah. Living with intentionality.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
I agree.
I feel like my understanding of prosperity has just expanded
That's
in so many ways. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone to like, subscribe, and share the Allison Knows podcast on Spotify and YouTube.
yes, please do.
We believe these conversations are vital
They are.
for spiritual growth, and we'd love to reach a wider audience.
Spread the word.
And for even more great content, join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
Yeah.
You can also follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.
All the places.
All the places. And we'll be back in just a moment to wrap up our deep dive into God's plan for prosperity with Myron Golden.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered so much ground today, exploring Myron Golden's perspective on God's plan for prosperity.
It's really been a thought-provoking journey.
It has been.
I'm still kind of, wrestling with this whole concept of wealth being a tool for good.
Right.
There's such a shift from the way we often view money as something that can corrupt or lead us astray.
Yeah. It definitely challenges our conventional thinking.
Yeah.
But, when we look at figures like Abraham and Joseph,
Right.
we see examples of individuals who used their wealth to bless others.
Right.
And to further God's purposes, they saw their resources as a way to create opportunities,
Yeah.
to provide for those in need, to build a legacy that extended far beyond their own lifetimes.
Yeah, it's really inspiring.
It is.
It makes me think about that parable of the talents,
Oh, yeah.
where the servants are entrusted with different amounts of money,
Right.
and they're expected to multiply what they've been given.
Yes.
It's not about hoarding it or squandering it,
Right.
but it's about using it wisely and creatively
Yeah.
to create abundance.
Exactly. And that idea of multiplication is so important.
Yeah.
When we align ourselves with God's principles of prosperity, it's not just about personal gain.
Right.
It's about creating this ripple effect of blessing
Right.
that touches the lives of others, using our resources to make a positive impact on the world around us.
So it's not just about how much we have,
Right.
but how we use it. So what are some practical ways that we can embody this principle of wealth as a tool for good?
Well, I think there's so many ways,
Yeah.
but I think it starts with our mindset.
Okay.
Are we viewing our finances through a lens of scarcity or abundance?
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah, are we grateful for what we have, or are we constantly striving for more?
Right.
And I think when we cultivate an attitude of gratitude and generosity,
Yeah.
it opens up possibilities for using our resources in really creative and meaningful ways.
That makes sense. I mean, our attitude towards money can either limit us
Absolutely.
or empower us to be a blessing to others.
Yes.
So what are some tangible things,
Tangible actions.
yeah, that we can take?
Well, I think it might look different for everyone.
Okay.
But here are a few ideas we can be intentional about supporting businesses and organizations that align with our values.
Okay.
We can give generously to charities and causes that are close to our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
We can invest in projects and initiatives that are making a positive difference in the world. We can even use our skills and talents to create opportunities for others.
Yeah.
Whether it's mentoring someone, offering our expertise pro bono,
Yeah.
or simply being a good neighbor.
I love that.
Yeah,
It's about being mindful of the impact our financial decisions have.
absolutely.
Not just on ourselves, but on the wider community.
That's right.
It's about seeing wealth as a responsibility.
Yeah.
Not just a privilege.
And I think it's important to remember that it's not about perfection or doing everything perfectly.
Right.
It's about starting where we are
Yeah.
with what we have.
Yeah.
And making small, consistent choices that reflect our commitment to using our resources for good.
It's about progress.
Yes.
Not perfection.
That's right.
And it's about, seeking God's guidance along the way, trusting that He will direct our steps
Absolutely.
and open doors of opportunity as we seek to honor Him with our finances.
Yes. And sometimes that might mean stepping outside of our comfort zones, taking risks, and trusting God to provide even when things feel uncertain.
Yeah, it's good.
It might mean challenging the status quo, questioning traditional financial systems, and seeking alternative models that are more equitable and sustainable.
Yeah, it's about being willing to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
So this whole conversation has just been so eye-opening.
It has been good.
I feel like it's really challenged me to think differently about my own relationship with money and the role it plays in my life.
I love that.
So what final words of encouragement would you offer to our listeners who are on their own journey of seeking God's plan for prosperity?
Well, I would say first and foremost, trust in God's goodness and faithfulness. He desires to bless you, not just materially, but in every area of your life. Seek His wisdom through prayer, study of the scriptures, and wise counsel from trusted mentors.
Yes.
Be willing to surrender your own plans and agendas to His, knowing that His ways are always higher than our own.
Yeah, that's good.
And remember that true prosperity is not just about what you accumulate,
Right?
but about who you become along the way.
That's beautifully said. It's about cultivating a heart of generosity, gratitude, and compassion.
Yes.
It's about using our resources to make a difference in the world, leaving a legacy of love and blessing that extends far beyond our own lifetimes.
That's right. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with people who share your values
Yes.
and support your journey. Seek out communities where you can learn and grow and encourage one another in the area of finances.
This has been such a powerful conversation. I know I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
Before we sign off, I want to encourage you one last time to like, subscribe, and share the Allison Knows podcast on Spotify and YouTube.
Yes, please do.
We believe these conversations are vital for spiritual growth,
They are.
and we'd love to reach a wider audience.
Spread the word.
And for even more great content, join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
That's right.
You can also follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.
All the places.
All the places. Thank you for listening to the Allison Knows podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
For more insights and inspiration, be sure to follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok. Until next time, may you live a life of purpose, passion, and prosperity in every area of your life.